No censorship and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Every Friday and Sunday night from 9, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
We're on the same page again. There's something good happening.
Let Ian finish. Don't be such a cranky.
That mini budget was the tip of the iceberg.
And on Saturday, my show just got bigger. From 8, it's Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In.
You can't govern a country if you can't speak. Stop talking.
My God, we reached the end. I've never been early in my life. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Hello, good afternoon, welcome. This is Real Britain with me, Emily Carver, on your TV, radio and online. Now, following the doom and gloom of Thursday's autumn statement, it looks like the majority of us are going to be feeling quite a bit poorer. So was the budget a recipe for decline? Or was it inevitability that we'd all be asked to cough up more taxes? Rishi Sunak is currently meeting President Zelensky in Ukraine, but he's also turned his attention to crime at home. He wants to see more people jailed as he revealed he worries about the safety of his young daughters. Do you have confidence he'll get crime down? And are we closer to a third world war than we want to admit? Or is that warmongering nonsense? Let me know what you think on all those topics throughout the show. But first, let's get your latest news headlines.
Good afternoon, it's 1 minute past 2. I'm Ray Addison in the GB Newsroom. Some breaking news in the last half hour. The Prime Minister has made an unannounced visit to Ukraine. Rishi Sunak travelled to the capital Kyiv to meet President Volodymyr Zelensky, reinforcing the UK's continued support for the country. And let's go straight to Kyiv now.
From your extraordinary liberation of Kherson. Only weeks ago, Moscow proclaimed that great city as its administrative capital. But last week, in the main square, a trumpet could be heard playing your national anthem once again. People joined in with the words, Shchetnemrela, Ukraini, ni slava, ni volia. The glory and freedom of Ukraine has not yet perished. Together, we will ensure that the glory and freedom of Ukraine will never perish. Slava Ukraini.
Heroям slava.
Statement is concluded. Thank you for the media.
Zelensky there in Kyiv, where they discussed global security concerns as well as issues that affect both countries. The leaders have been speaking in Kyiv. FIFA's president has defended the decision to host the World Cup in Qatar and tried to show empathy during a news conference.
Today I feel gay. Today I feel disabled.
Gianni Infantino's comments follow heavy criticism of Doha's treatment of migrant workers and LGBTQ people. He says he's compassionate towards all groups. He also accused the West of hypocrisy, telling European nations they have a lot to answer for.
I'm European. Actually, I am European. Not just I feel European. I think for what we Europeans have been doing in the last 3,000 years around the world, we should be apologizing for the next 3,000 years. before starting to give moral lessons.
Well, human rights campaigner Peter Tatchell told GB News the tournament should never have been given to Qatar, and anyone connected with it risks damaging their reputation.
Well, I think it's really shameful that celebrities are allowing themselves to be bought by the Qatar billions in order to put a positive spin on what is a sexist, homophobic and racist dictatorship. I mean, how can David Beckham, Robbie Williams and all these other big stars who are performing in Qatar, how can they have a clean conscience when they know what this regime is doing to people? I think it's going to cause them huge, huge damage.
The United Nations is proposing the creation of a new fund to help developing countries cope with the cost of climate change. The money would be used to compensate 134 developing nations for the loss and damage experienced due to droughts, floods and wildfires. The text is yet to be approved by the COP27 summit in Egypt, which had to be extended after delegates failed to reach an agreement. The search for a woman who was swept into a river has resumed in Aberdeenshire. It's believed that she was trying to rescue a dog in the River Don at Monymusk when she got into difficulty. Heavy rain in the east of Scotland triggered several severe flood warnings, with the wet weather continuing to cause travel disruption today. The Foreign Secretary is warning that the threat from Iran's nuclear programme is more advanced than ever before. Speaking at a security conference in Bahrain, James Cleverly stressed Britain's determination to stop the strict Islamic country from acquiring a nuclear weapon. He also criticised Iran's rulers for supplying Russia with drones, which have then been used to launch attacks against civilians in Ukraine.
People demonstrate against decades of oppression. Iran's rulers are spreading bloodshed and destruction across the region and as far away as Kyiv. Britain is determined to work alongside our friends to counter the Iranian threat, interdict the smuggling of conventional arms, and prevent the regime from acquiring nuclear weapons capability.
In more international news, North Korea says it's accelerating the creation of nuclear weapons to counter threats from Washington. State media showed video of a new intercontinental ballistic missile being test-fired after the country's leader warned of a fiercer military response. Kim Jong-un was also seen in public with his daughter for the first time, raising speculation that she could be training for a leadership role. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's get back to Real Britain with Emily Carver.
Welcome back to Real Britain with me, Emily Carver. So here's what's coming up on the show. Jeremy Hunt has portrayed the government as a victim of global events as he unveiled a series of tax rises and spending curbs amid new official forecasts that show a steep recession will effectively wipe out 8 years of growth for Brits. Rishi Sunak has also said he fears for his daughter's safety when they're out alone, saying that men have often taken their own freedoms for granted. He said that the prospect of his daughter, 11-year-old Krishna, walking to school on her own brings it home on the importance of tackling crime. And the missile strike in Poland that killed 2 people on Tuesday and triggered an emergency meeting of G7 leaders caused Western media and pundits to raise fears of an escalation in Russian aggression. Rishi Sunak is there in Ukraine at the moment, meeting with President Zelensky. Should we be worried about an escalation coming our way? That's what we're talking about for the next hour. I'd love to know your thoughts. Please do tweet me at GB News or at Carver Emily, or you can email on gbviews@gbnews.uk. Remember, you can also watch us online on YouTube. Thank you very much for tuning in. Now, someone once tweeted me that I could deliver the news of a meteor hitting the face of the Earth and keep a smile on my face. I'm not sure if it was meant as a compliment, but I chose to take it as one. There's enough doom and gloom in the world, much better to at least try and see the cup half full. I must admit, it's been a little bit tricky to try and put a positive spin on this week's news. Whichever way you slice it, the majority of us are going to feel a hell of a lot poorer, and for rather a long time. Perhaps you see this as the inevitable consequence of the pandemic. In a shock to none of you, I'm sure, it turns out that printing and spending hundreds of billions propping up our economy and paying millions of people to sit at home comes at a cost, and a gigantic cost at that. A big fat bill has landed in our laps, delivering a big fat slap in the face for Middle England. As the IFS said yesterday, Britain is heading for an era of permanently higher taxes. I'm usually loath to agree with Keir Starmer, but we are indeed in a doom loop. Tax and spend with little prospect of reform to our ailing public services. We saw how Liz Truss tried to change that trajectory, and we saw how swiftly she received her marching orders. It's hard now not to see Britain as a country in decline. Our political establishment seems to think the best way to boost GDP is to continue to prop up the economy with cheap labour from abroad. A quick fix that will do nothing to improve productivity long term, boost stagnant wages and get people off benefits and back into work. Our optimism about Brexit has also understandably waned. Only 32% of us now think Brexit was the right call, if you believe the polls at least. But again, this is hardly surprising when the government has failed to get migrant crossings under control, sort the Northern Ireland Protocol, or do away with unnecessary EU regulations. But perhaps you take the view that as a country we've gone through far worse and we can do the same again. It's not as if we're alone in this world suffering the consequences of rampant inflation and gigantic government debt. So I'm asking, is Britain firmly in decline, or do you think this is all just a blip in our country's success story? Well, I'm not sure. Are we in decline? It seemed like that budget statement was a bit of a recipe for decline rather than one for prosperity or growth, indeed. But perhaps you think this is just a blip and that British people are strong enough and work hard enough to get things back on track. Perhaps we need a new government. Chancellor Jeremy Hunt, of course, unveiled a series of tax rises and spending cuts in his autumn statement on Thursday, in what has been dubbed by many as Austerity 2.0. Among those measures announced were a reduction in the threshold for the top rate of income tax from £150,000 to just over £125,000, and a freeze on thresholds for income tax. That's the killer. That will bring millions of people, hundreds of thousands at least, into higher rates of tax in the next few years. National insurance and inheritance tax have also been changed, and that will mean millions of Brits will suffer the consequences. Now, Labour has described the autumn statement as an invoice for the economic carnage of Liz Truss's mini-budget. The Institute of Fiscal Studies has said that Britain has entered a new era of permanently higher taxes. Is this all a necessary readjustment, or is it, as I said, a recipe for decline? With me now is Malcolm Grimston, Senior Research Fellow at the Centre for Energy Policy and Tech at Imperial College, and Vicky Price, Chief Economic Advisor at the Centre for Economic and Business Research. Malcolm, do you believe that this statement is a return to austerity? Is that a true characterisation?
Well, one of the things we see in the energy business is that the economy goes in cycles. In the case of energy, you get periods of quite low energy prices. That means not much investment goes in, so prices start to rise because kit reaches the end of its life and it hasn't been replaced. That extra profit means that people think, well, it is time to invest now. They invest, and that brings the prices down. And typically, that can be a 20 or 30-year cycle. And I think the general economy goes in those sorts of cycles as well. It's been interrupted by the enormous shock of Brexit, the COVID crisis, which has clearly skewed the economy enormously. But my own belief is that the economy will get back on its feet, but it's going to be very, very difficult to get us there.
Vicky, Labour, as I said in the introduction there, Labour have said, are putting this all down to Liz Truss's car crash of a mini-budget. They're saying if that weren't the case, we wouldn't have such a large fiscal hole, as it's been called. Do you think this is an invoice for the economic carnage that Liz Truss's mini-budget caused, or is this more about the pandemic?
It is a bit of a reaction to what happened over those few weeks when it looked like we were going to be borrowing a lot of money without any real idea of how we were going to get any of that paid for in any different ways. So the markets, as you remember, went on strike. So interest rates went up very significantly in the bond market, and the Bank of England had to intervene. The capital markets, listening to what Jeremy Hunt was saying even before Rishi Sunak was made Prime Minister. If you remember, he was Chancellor under Liz Truss as well for a very few moments before she resigned. They were already pacified because so many of those tax cuts were reversed almost immediately. So that hole that we had, about 45 billion, was reduced to just 10 billion. What is concerning right now is that we seem to have discovered an even bigger hole. So we're talking about 50 billion, maybe 60 billion, looking ahead over the next 5 years. So what the Chancellor has had to do is abandon, in fact, some of his fiscal rules. And I find it quite interesting that the capital markets have accepted it. So what he's done is he's now delayed when debt to GDP ratio was going to start coming down to the end of 5 years. He has abandoned the idea of having a balanced budget. So we're still going to be borrowing. And if you look at where we will be at the end of those 5 years, we're still going to be borrowing something like 67 billion pounds in that year. So we seem to have accepted that, yes, indeed, I think as you rightly said, we had a number of crises, not just the Brexit one, but then the COVID one, and now, of course, the war in Ukraine. And we just have to live with it. And the question for him was to satisfy the capital markets that actually the plan was still a sensible one.
Malcolm, you're an energy expert. So the government, as Vicky said, we're going to be in debt for many, many years. I don't think we've balanced the books for upwards of a decade, possibly longer. We seem to constantly be living on the credit card, although I know that we're not allowed to say it's like a household, the government finances, but we have been living out of our means for a very long time. The government has said now that they want to spend billions extra on energy efficiency measures, essentially insulating housing stock up and down the land. They want to keep investing in Sizewell C, the nuclear power plant, and so on. Do you think that this money will reap rewards? I worry that the government has a habit of wasting money on big infrastructure projects.
Certainly, there is a history of large infrastructure projects not living up to their initial thing, going back as far as Concorde or the Channel Tunnel. But one of the big problems with the British economy has been really that we didn't use the last decade and a bit of extremely low interest rates when we could have invested quite heavily in the infrastructure that would eventually bring prices down. To take one example where I'm involved with nuclear power, had we been building nuclear power stations 10, 15 years ago, they would be operating today, and that would be an enormous reduction in the economy's reliance on imported gas and the enormous prices we're having to pay there. And an economy can't get by just on running its existing kit into the ground. It has to invest at some point. It's a shame that we weren't investing, as I say, when interest rates were rather lower. But we can't, the simple thing, whenever you're in a crisis, is to say we're going to stop investing for the long term. That's kind of looks like the easy bit, but that's the fatal bit. Successful companies, there's a 2x2 matrix of whether something is important and whether something is urgent. And the most important of those quadrants is the things that are important but not urgent, because the temptation is to put those off. And the longer you put those off, the more you find yourself being pushed into the important and urgent, in other words, crisis management. And I do hope that we'll learn that lesson and make the investments very heavily at this stage, because if we don't do that, we're just going to be in a continuous crisis of this nature.
Now, Vicky, in terms of how this is going to impact people in jobs, one of the things the government has been proud about is that unemployment has been low, and some economists have hoped, at least, that this could be a job-rich recession, i.e. unemployment won't go up too high. Do you think that will be the case, or do you think we're going to see unemployment rising quite rapidly?
Well, it's interesting because we had the Office for Budget Responsibility, the thing we were all waiting for, which was the problem with the mini budget. It didn't have any analysis under it. But there is also, of course, an economic forecast that accompanies that, which we're all looking at, we economists and everyone else, very, very carefully, because it does include issues to do with unemployment. And what we found is that the Bank of England had been quite pessimistic in its forecast, which only came out in early November, where they expected there was going to be a recession for a couple of years at least, and then very little growth afterwards, which would have meant also that unemployment would double practically, would rise to something like 6.4% from about 3.5, 3.6 where it is now, which was a worry. Again, it wouldn't be going up to where levels we've seen before in previous recessions, but it certainly would be going up quite significantly. What the OBR seems to think, for all sorts of reasons, is that, in fact, the recession is going to be fast and rather shallow. So we're going to have a drop of just 1.4% in GDP next year, and then we'll have a recovery. And that recovery will be quite substantial. So we're talking about growth of maybe 2.6% per annum for a number of years during this forecast period, which I think most other forecasters would find perhaps a bit on the optimistic side. But on that basis, unemployment only rises to just under 5%. So that's better news if indeed it proves to be the case.
Malcolm, now I don't know if you have a strong view on this or not, but one of the things in the budget is, of course, reducing the threshold on that 45p rate of income tax. Do you think this is a problem in terms of aspiration? You know, people vote Conservative because they think it supports personal responsibility, working hard, and that you should be rewarded for that work fairly. It looks like those who are on £100,000 to £125,000 will now be paying essentially a 60p rate on what they earn between there. So 60%, more than half of your money will be taken away between those two rates. Do you think that's fair? Do you think that's a good policy at this time? Or do you think perhaps it's political posturing more than actually going to get in too much revenue?
I mean, I have to say, this is not my specialist area, but my impression is there have been some quite interesting polls over the last couple of weeks suggesting that there has been a shift in the proportion of people who think higher taxes and higher spending is the way for the moment, against those that say leave it as it is, keep the balance as present. I think it is recognised that the amount of money that the government had to put in to keep people afloat during the COVID crisis was enormous. That was money that had to be spent, but it does need ultimately to be paid back. And a period, therefore, when we do need to recognise that those of us like myself who are in the fortunate position, I'm not a high rate taxpayer, but I'm comfortable, then I should be paying my full energy bill. I'm in the crazy position. I'm on a 2-year power deal, so my power prices haven't gone up yet. And yet the government has just thrown £400 at me. So I'm paying less for energy than I was a year ago, when I could afford, fortunately, the prices there. I'd much rather that they were targeting those towards those things and putting taxes up, maybe only for the short or medium term, but putting taxes up until we get through this crisis.
Now, Vicky, not to go over things that have already happened and can't be changed, but I would just dispute what Malcolm said there about it was money we needed to spend. Those were political choices back during the pandemic. There's new data coming out from Sweden, new analysis of the data. Pandemic-related measures cost 60 billion krona there, about £460 a head. That's less than a tenth of what the UK spent on COVID-related measures. This was a policy failure, was it not, that's left us in this mess?
You could argue that perhaps the lockdown was overdone. I think if that's what you're talking about, and indeed we've seen the odd country sort of do things differently, and whether the number of deaths was different, that's questionable at present. But yeah, there was a decision. It wasn't necessarily a political decision. It was one that was depending quite a lot on what the scientists were saying. So, and it was one which obviously the politicians at the time, not just here, but in the vast majority of countries, felt they had to do something about. And in fact, we're not the only ones to have spent a lot of money on the furlough scheme. If you look at Europe, they spend even more. In fact, overall, with some exceptions, of course, overall, what we found is that they gave a lot more certainty to businesses. So what we saw was that they carried on supporting sectors a lot longer. And you do remember probably that the scheme would finish and then start up again. All sorts of other things were implemented in the meantime. There is a complete look right now as whether it was all done properly and what it actually also meant in terms of deaths. And I think we can't draw a conclusion as to which of those measures was the best, really. But it does mean that we have borrowed an awful lot, just as you said at the beginning. And what I would dispute as well in what we've just been discussing is this idea that we're going to pay something back. We're not. We're still going to be borrowing. So we haven't moved in a situation where we can say we're going to really not leave the next generation with any debts, because they're going to be left with loads more debts. And the main point we need to emphasize is that we need for those debts to not have huge interest rate attached to them or a huge inflation, which of course brings the repayments to even higher level than we had anticipated originally.
Thank you very much. We're going to be... we're going to stay in debt for very many years to come, it seems. Thank you very much. That was Malcolm Grimston, Senior Research Fellow at the Centre for Energy Policy and Tech at Imperial College, and Vicky Price, Chief Economic Advisor at the Centre for Economic and Business Research. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. Now, just before we head to the break, in the last few minutes, the boss of the Housing Association has been sacked following the death of a 2-year-old boy. The coroner has concluded that Awab Ishaq died in 2020 after living in mouldy, rented accommodation. The board said it has taken the decision to remove Gareth Swarbrick from his post as Chief Executive of Rochdale Borough-wide Housing with immediate effect. Now, plenty more to come this afternoon on Real Britain. After the break, Rishi Sunak, who it's just been announced has been revealed in the last half hour, has visited Ukraine to meet President Zelensky, has said he fears for his daughter's safety when out alone, saying that men have often taken their own freedoms for granted. He said that the prospect of his daughter, 11-year-old Krishna, walking to school on her own brings it home on the importance of tackling crime. But first, let's take a look at the weather.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK will be mostly dry, but heavy rain will push in from the west. Here are the details. Let's start off in the southwest of England, and it will be a cloudy end to the day with some rain starting to reach western parts of Cornwall, spreading to all later. Over in the southeast, it'll be cloudy for some, with outbreaks of rain, especially in London. Other areas, though, will have a clear evening. Turning cloudier across Wales this evening, so whilst eastern parts may have some clear spells, the cloud will thicken ahead of rain arriving later. Cloud and a few spots of rain are likely for the East Midlands. Meanwhile, the West Midlands should end the day on a dry and clear note before things turn wet overnight. A cloudy picture this evening for northeast England. The odd spot of rain is possible, but for many it'll be dry. Some low cloud may bring hill fog to any higher routes. Often cloudy for much of Scotland this evening, with some rain likely. Heavy rain then arriving from the west overnight, spreading to all parts and becoming impactful in the east. A very wet and windy evening for Northern Ireland. Here the rain should clear during the first part of the night, so it will be drier and clearer to start Sunday. The band of heavy rain will continue to sweep eastwards to all parts overnight, with clearer but showery weather following. That's how the weather is shaping up overnight into tomorrow morning.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Welcome back to Real Britain on GB News, on TV, online and on your digital radio. I'm Emily Carver. Now, Rishi Sunak has said that concerns about his daughter's safety motivates him to make the streets safer for women. Speaking to reporters at the G20 summit in Bali, the Prime Minister said that, like most men, he takes his own safety for granted. But the prospect of his 11-year-old daughter, Krishna, walking to school by herself brought home the importance of cutting crime. He made the comments as he pledged to stand by the Tory manifesto commitment of hiring 20,000 more police officers. Joining me now is former Chief Superintendent Parm Sandhu. Hello, Parm. Now, I think Rishi's right to acknowledge, of course, that women often feel very unsafe on the streets. But what do you think he's going to do about it?
It was quite an interesting interview in that he speaks about his daughter and recognises the issues around the violence against women and girls. But he also widened the interview quite a bit, and he talked about, as you say, the manifesto commitments to increasing the number of police officers. He talked about levelling up and reducing crime, and he also talked about having more prison spaces. So it's quite a wide-reaching interview. So although he talked about his own daughters and the safety, he then widened it into the manifesto commitments. He did talk about locking up more offenders and actually putting them into prisons. And although he feels uncomfortable about the numbers of prisoners going up, but he feels that that's a necessary thing to do, which most people will agree with. But there needs to be more interventions, there needs to be more protection. But that protection isn't just about women and girls, because that will extend right across the country and increase trust and confidence in policing.
Yes, because I think one of the major issues for a lot of people, a lot of our viewers, isn't necessarily violent crime against women, which thankfully is quite rare on our streets, at least. It's the sort of everyday crimes, the nicking of cars out of your drive or from outside your home, or being robbed on the street, or sort of crimes like that that aren't so high profile but seem to happen every day. How can we get that sort of thing under control?
As soon as you get a politician recognising that there is an issue, hopefully there will be a plan to put something in place to deal with that. And as you say, people weren't even getting police officers to their homes after being burgled. Police weren't always attending when somebody was being robbed. And although this interview talks about the 9-year-old girl in Liverpool, Olivia, who was shot dead. And, we know that there's been some many high-profile cases recently where there have been failures in policing or protecting women. But if he is serious and he does commit to, and as he says, neighbourhood policing and having the extra 20,000 police officers, that will have an impact right across the spectrum into the theft of cars, into the burglaries. So there will be more police officers and there will be more interventions. But also, it's not enough to just arrest these people. They've got to be charged and they've got to be sent away to prison. That's the answer. Now, if he's talking about it now, hopefully there will be a plan behind this to make that happen.
Now, of course, most people care about women being safe on the streets, but of course, the police have been under a lot of shame, basically, for how they've been for the culture within the police. Now, you've written on this. You've written about that report that came out off the back of the horrific Sarah Everard case about the misogyny that's within the police. Do you believe that is rampant? You've been in the business for a long time. Have you witnessed that? Have you seen it?
I have witnessed it and seen it, but what I do need to say is that the majority of police officers are good and caring and they're there for the right reasons. The misconduct procedures have broken, and that the people who need to be sacked and got rid of, or who should never, ever have been allowed to wear a police uniform, aren't being disposed of quickly enough. And that's because of the misconduct procedures within policing. That needs to be looked at and it needs to be tightened. People weren't being vetted properly and they were being given a police uniform and walking down the streets. So that needs to be dealt with. And if we're looking at the safety of women, we're looking at the safety of all of our citizens, that will change when the police side of it is dealt with. And if he's looking at safety of everybody, he has to look at that as well.
Yeah, and a lot of our viewers are very concerned about the numbers of people crossing the channel unchecked, perhaps, and entering areas of our country without the checks and balances on who they are, whether they have criminal records and so on and so forth. How does the police act in this case. Oh, I'm so sorry, I'm being shouted at in my ear. I have to finish the interview there, but thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. That was former Chief Superintendent Parm Sandhu. Thank you very much for your time. Now, you're on TV, you're on GB News on TV and DAB radio. After the break, the missile strike in Poland that killed 2 people on Tuesday triggered an emergency meeting of G7 leaders and caused Western media and pundits to raise fear of an escalation in Russian aggression. How worried should we be? Now it's time for a check on the news headlines.
Thanks, Emily. It's 2:34. I'm Ray Addison in the GB Newsroom. The UK is boosting its support for Ukraine, pledging around £50 million package of air defence aid. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak confirmed the move during an unannounced visit to Kyiv earlier. He told President Volodymyr Zelensky the UK will continue to stand with the country as it fights to end the barbarous war.
Homes, your hospitals, your power stations are being destroyed by the air. So to help you defend yourselves, we are today providing new air defence support, including 120 anti-aircraft guns, radar and anti-drone equipment. We're extending our training for the Ukrainian armed forces to include specialist expertise from UK medics and engineers. And we are stepping up our support to help you through the cold, hard winter ahead.
FIFA's president has defended the decision to host the World Cup in Qatar and tried to show empathy during a news conference.
Today I feel gay. Today I feel disabled.
Gianni Infantino's comments follow heavy criticism of Doha's treatment of migrant workers and LGBTQ people. He says he's compassionate towards all groups. He also accused the West of hypocrisy, telling European nations they have a lot to answer for. The United Nations is proposing the creation of a new fund to help developing countries cope with the cost of climate change. The money would be used to compensate around 134 developing nations for the loss and damage experienced due to droughts, floods and wildfires. The text is yet to be approved by the COP27 summit in Egypt. On TV, online and on DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Emily will be back in just a moment.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Friday and Sunday night from 9, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
We're on the same page again. There's something weird happening.
Let Ian finish. Don't be such a cranky.
That mini budget was the tip of the iceberg.
And on Saturday, my show just got bigger. From 8, it's Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In.
You can't govern a country if you can't speak.
Stop talking. My God, we reached the end. I've never been early in my life. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. There's never been a more interesting but also critical time in British politics, and I can't wait to bring you the biggest stories of the day with the best factual accuracy and also a few of my own opinions thrown in. We'll engage in passionate but always polite debate with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Monday to Thursday, 10 till 12 on TV, on radio and online.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Welcome back to Real Britain with me, Emily Carver, on GB News, on TV, online and on your digital radio. Now, in the past hour, Rishi Sunak arrived in Kyiv for a meeting with President Volodymyr Zelensky. Number 10 says the meeting was held to confirm continued UK support for Ukraine.
In years to come, we will tell our grandchildren of your story, how a proud and sovereign people stood up in the face of an appalling onslaught, how you fought, how you sacrificed, how you prevailed. As Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, I'm proud of how we stood with you from the very beginning. And I'm here today to say that the United Kingdom will continue to stand with you. We will stand with you until Ukraine has won the peace and security it needs and deserves.
Now, this follows the now de-escalated fears sparked by the missile strike inside Poland and almost half of Ukraine's energy system being disabled. GB News political reporter Olivia Utley is here with us now to discuss this. So what do we know? It was a message of solidarity, seemingly.
A message of solidarity, and it'll come as a relief to those Ukraine hawks and the Conservative Party. I mean, Ben Wallace among them, of course, who worried when Boris Johnson left government because, of course, Boris Johnson had that fantastic relationship with Zelensky. They were making Boris Johnson-shaped croissants or something in Ukraine a few months ago. So it'll be a big relief that Rishi Sunak is there, making all the right noises, sending out the right signals. The issue is that going to be matched with spending? Because, of course, Ben Wallace said that he wouldn't serve in a government unless defence spending was raised. And Jeremy Hunt so far hasn't yet committed to that. He sort of fudged it. He said he's going to do a full review of defence spending and see where that gets him. But yes, warm words from Rishi Sunak, a show of solidarity, which will definitely come as a relief to those who are worried about, for anyone who's worried about the situation in Ukraine and wants Britain's relationship, wants Britain to be at the forefront of this defence. But will it be matched with the spending commitment?
Yes. Have we not heard, has he not pulled any rabbits out of the hat in terms of millions here and there on equipment or anything?
Not lately. The budget was all sort of kicking the can down the road a bit. It's hard to see how he can... Ben Wallace is hugely important politically to Rishi Sunak, and he couldn't really afford to lose Ben Wallace. There were plenty, poll after poll, and we did lots of interviews with ordinary Brits around the country who said that they wanted Ben Wallace to serve as Prime Minister. Obviously, Ben Wallace didn't run, but Ben Wallace is completely integral to the Prime Minister's chance of success. And it's hard to see how Ben Wallace could stay in a cabinet if the Prime Minister doesn't commit to the 3% defence spending and commit to more weapons, etc., as you say, millions for Ukrainian, to help Ukrainian troops. But as yet, that hasn't happened. We're just seeing the warm words at the moment.
Now, we're going to go to Colonel Richard Kemp in a minute or two. He's written an article about... He says, are we closer to World War III than we admit? But to get your view more on the politics and the optics of Rishi Sunak in Ukraine, it seems that he's very much taking to the international stage. He may not have the pizzazz of Boris Johnson and perhaps the sense of humour, but he is out there very much showing that Britain is on the side of Ukraine, on the side of... He was out and about in Bali at the G20 summit.
Absolutely, and I think so far he will have reassured quite a lot of Conservative backbenchers who were beginning to worry that it looked as though Britain just didn't really have a serious government. They sort of, in a way, didn't mind so much about policy when it came to international relations. They were just worried about the sort of optics and how the Prime Minister got on with various world leaders. And Rishi Sunak, it seems, has shown himself to be a serious player. He had that meeting with Biden. He was firm about the Northern Ireland Protocol, which will have somewhat reassured Irish unionists, but I'm not quite sure how he's going to achieve this breakthrough that he's been talking about. He agreed to meet with President Xi, which didn't end up happening, which will, of course, worry a lot of China hawks, Ian Duncan Smith among them, who feel that the last thing we need is another golden age era with our relationships with China. And now he's there with Zelensky, showing that Britain is still keen to lead that fight against Russia.
I think Rishi Sunak is going to find it hard with some of the public. We saw that when he was at COP27, he recommitted billions of pounds of taxpayers' money to various international climate schemes. Of course, tens of millions of our money is going towards the Ukraine war effort. I do wonder how this is going to play with hard-pressed voters, hard-pressed working people, ordinary people across the country who are thinking, well, you've got money for that, why am I being taxed so much?
Yes, and I think there is a bit of a danger that we might be starting to see of Rishi Sunak trying to be all things to all people. As you say, he talks over and over again about wanting to, put the arm of the state around the people and help squeeze middle-income families who are struggling to make ends meet. And then he goes to the G20 and makes these big international spending commitments. We also see how, he tells one media channel that he says that inflation is the biggest priority facing Britain today, and he tells another media channel that migration is the biggest
That is very true. He does seem to be saying what he thinks whoever he's talking to wants to hear, which I guess is a little bit Boris Johnson.
It is a little bit Boris Johnson, but with such a different manner.
Very different manner, perhaps not the same thing. Thank you very much, Olivia. That, of course, is our political reporter, Olivia Utley, in the studio. Now, earlier this week, writing in The Telegraph, Colonel Richard Kemp warned that we are much closer, or could be much closer, to World War III than people are prepared to admit. Kemp says we must understand that President Putin could make an irrational move at any time that could escalate the conflict, such as attacking NATO weapons supplies and surveillance planes to compensate for the setbacks his troops are suffering on the battlefield. Colonel Richard Kemp, a former British infantry commander, is with me now. Richard, your columns are never particularly uplifting. It does seem that they can be, what you write is rather alarming.
Yeah, perhaps so. I dread to think, though, I was very alarmed when I heard Olivia talking about Boris Johnson-shaped croissants in Kiev. So I think I'd avoid going there while they're on sale, to be honest. But yeah, it wasn't really meant to create panic. In fact, what I did say in that article was that the somewhat panic that emerged after the missile strike in Poland, whoever it was fired by, was not really well founded, because even if it had been fired by Russia and it was a mistake, it would not have led to war. I think maybe if Russia deliberately fired a barrage of missiles into Poland, that might be a different picture, but a mistake is not war. But I think the point I was trying to make really above all was that even though that's the case, that this was, however it worked out, it was not intended to attack or kill anyone in Poland. But that doesn't mean it couldn't happen. I think it's very likely it could happen at some point. And weapons from NATO come through Poland into Ukraine. And Vladimir Putin may well think that he'd be justified in striking those weapons which are being used to kill his soldiers. So I think that's the sort of scenario that I potentially envisage. And the fact that Putin's on the back foot now in Ukraine does not mean he's not likely to do something like. In fact, perhaps he's even more likely to do something of that sort. And his thinking about whether it would be a good idea or not to directly confront NATO now may not be the same as ours. We might think he would be foolish to do so. He might not think the same.
Now, we've seen Rishi Sunak is in Ukraine talking to President Zelensky. How important are these kind of events, the fact that he's gone over there unannounced to show solidarity? Surely Zelensky simply wants more either ammunition or money to fund his war effort. Will he get that from Rishi Sunak?
He definitely wants that. There's no question. Not only does he want it, he needs it. And no doubt he will have twisted Rishi Sunak's arm up his back during the talk. So that's a good reason for Sunak to be there, to hear directly from Zelensky what he needs. And I don't think there's any substitute for a political leader like Sunak going onto the ground and meeting face to face with the people who are fighting for their lives. I think it's really important. And it's not only important for that, it's also important for the Ukrainians to see that we are standing strongly alongside them. They know that anyway, because they've received huge numbers of weapons and money from us, and their soldiers are currently being trained by us in the UK and given equipment. So there's no doubt we, just behind the United States, I think, are the leading world power in supporting Ukraine. And I'm sure they appreciate that and will even more appreciate his presence there in Kiev today.
Now, Richard, what's the best case scenario here? In your article, you talk about how deterrence is key. It seems that we're failing on that front. although we've spent so much money helping Ukraine and have offered so much support in the way of weapons and in terms of humanitarian aid and so on and so forth, and just in terms of words, what is the best case scenario? Because it doesn't seem like President Putin has any desire to retreat.
No, he doesn't, and he won't retreat unless he's forced back. There's no doubt about that. I think the whole.
But what are you saying, Richard? Richard, what are you saying with that? Sorry to interrupt, but are you saying that essentially NATO military powers should get more involved, should have boots on the ground, should be prepared to do that? How far would you go?
I don't think that's likely to happen, and it doesn't make any difference what I think about it. I don't think that's likely to happen, even though General Petraeus, the famous American general, suggested perhaps there could be a coalition of the willing, maybe led by the United States, perhaps including Poland, Romania, and possibly the UK. I don't suppose many other countries would be willing to take part, to actually get involved in some way in the conflict directly. But I don't think that's very likely to happen, and I don't think the UK would join it if it did. It's unlikely possible. But I think in terms of deterrence, we obviously, well, in terms of contribution, we're making a major contribution, as I outlined just now. In terms of deterrence, which you raise, the reason I think Putin went into Ukraine in the first place this year was because he does not see the West as being strong enough to stand up to him. He might have been a bit surprised at the strong reaction, but nevertheless, there was no direct military involvement. There hasn't been, and there's no prospect of it, which leaves him pretty much a free hand to deal with Ukraine as he can, as far as the Ukrainian army will allow him to, and they've been very strong in their defense of Ukraine. But I think, the fundamental errors we've made in the past that led to this situation are things like withdrawing from Afghanistan after a 20-year commitment there. We showed our weakness, NATO I'm talking about now, including the UK and the US, showed our weakness by pulling out. Previously, the US showed its weakness, as did the UK, of not enforcing its red lines about chemical use in Syria. We're withdrawing from Mali in the face of Russian mercenaries deployed there, despite the fact we say Mali is a national interest for us. The French have already gone out of Mali. So pretty much everywhere we're showing retreat. And I think our defence spending is a very important part. You mentioned that to Olivia earlier. I think it's really important that apart from having the right capability, the right messages sent about our willingness to fight if necessary. And right now, the integrated review that happened in 2021 just cut our forces. It provided funding for certain things, but it did cut the infantry, tanks, etc., which are hard-edged weapons which Ukraine has shown are still vitally important, on top of artificial intelligence, cyberspace, high-tech, and all the rest of the very important things that were financed by the Defence Review. But I think, hopefully, when the integrated review is refreshed, calling it this year, hopefully this year, it will change some of that and build up our forces again. But of course, that needs vast amount of money, because you need the technology and you need the hard combat power. All of it is phenomenally expensive.
Which, unfortunately, we don't have too much of at the moment. But thank you very much, Colonel Richard Kemp, former British infantry commander, talking us through Rishi's visit to Ukraine this afternoon. Now, lots of you have been getting in touch today about today's topics. Mark on Russia says, given how the Russians behaved when they believed they were winning, I have little sympathy for any soldiers that were captured or indeed those considered as collaborators. War is brutal and should be a harsh lesson for everyone concerned not to repeat it. The simple solution is for Russia to do what they do best and run away. They have no business invading a sovereign country. I very much agree with you on that one. Paul on the autumn statement has to say, here's an idea. Stop spending billions on HS2, stop spending billions on Ukraine, stop the illegal immigration to save the drain on schools, NHS housing, etc., and save billions. Stop raising taxes to encourage people to decide how best to spend their own money. I think a lot of people would agree with you on those. I think a lot of people are very angry that we're spending just so much money housing illegal immigrants and asylum seekers who are crossing the channel. That is a huge drain on us, and everyone is having to pay for all of that. Alan, on decline, says, Emily, until we have a positive and courageous government of decent, honest people, we will continue to decline. Since the 70s, we've had a range of governments with no vision. There is great potential in this country, but we are governed by idiots incapable of common sense and devoid of reality of life. The crisis lies in the hopeless set of politicians we have. I think there's a lot of truth in that. I'm not sure who would want to be a politician these days. Now, moving on, after Thursday's autumn statement, GB News business and economics editor Liam Halligan sifted through the small print and discovered an announcement about fuel duty that Jeremy Hunt did not mention when he stood at the dispatch box.
There's going to be a 23% increase in the fuel duty rate in late March 2023.
How much? 23%?
Which adds £5.7 billion to receipts next year, says the OBR. This would be a record cash increase and the first time any government's raised fuel duty rates in cash terms since January 2011. It's expected to raise the price of petrol and diesel by around 12 pence per litre.
So joining me now is Howard Cox, founder of Fair Fuel UK. Howard, have the government been rather sneaky with this fuel duty hike?
I think that's putting it kindly, Emily. I think what they've done is they're dishonest, disingenuous and downright incompetent. What's so worrying about it is that this was in the OBR report at a press conference and Liam called me to ask my comments on this and I was getting phone calls galore as soon as the press conference of the OBR announced the 23%. Don't forget, 12p is what's going up, but with VAT on top, it'll be more like 16 pence. To drivers, which is something like £9 for an average family car and £60 for a truck. The whole impact on the economy will be disastrous. It would raise inflation and really increase the cost of living even further. And yes, you're absolutely right. Ask the question. Jeremy Hunt is being dishonest. He knew that OBR report contained that paragraph. So why did he not mention it? It's the first budget in the 13 years I've been campaigning about fuel duty that didn't mention fuel duty.
What's so frustrating is that, of course, our policies are set in Westminster. A lot of our politicians live their lives in cities. They take public transport or they take taxis here and there, everywhere. It's the ordinary working people of this country who will see their bills go up dramatically when it comes to filling up their car, and they have to use their cars. You know, it's not an option not to in large parts of our country. Most people still use their car for their commute. It's essentially another tax on economic activity, isn't it?
Absolutely right. I mean, it's crippling. I've been campaigning for 13 years and I've had the CBR and other very respected economic analysts say that if you cut fuel duty, you increase wages, you increase GDP, you reduce inflation, you increase consumer spending and you increase business investment for drivers. I mean, I'm backed by the Road Haulage Association for 13 years and their members, something like 40 to 50% of their costs are fuel now. And that's ridiculous. That's unsustainable. And it's going to be a crippling effect on the economy. And what's bad about this is these numbers were actually entrenched in the OBR predictions for Jeremy Hunt to actually use in his decision making. And why isn't he not mentioning what he's going to do with fuel duty? He said they haven't made any decisions. This is so dishonest. And I am going to be putting both barrels of our campaigning efforts into actually attacking the government. And fortunately, I've got some great backbench Tory MPs who's coming on my side, including people like Priti Patel.
Well, Howard, you are a fantastic campaigner. You seem to be able to rally the troops in government, the backbench MPs, the media, etc., whenever you have a cause to fight. I wonder what you think of something else that was in the autumn statement, well, something that was actually contained in it, rather than sneakily in the OBR statement. Now, this was about electric vehicles. Now, people who bought electric vehicles thought, oh, this is great, we're not going to be taxed too much, we're going to have cheap driving. Turns out they may well be paying the same or a reduction in road taxes. What's the deal on that?
Well, we don't know the detail. Maybe it's hidden somewhere in another page in the OBR report. We haven't got a clue. But what is good about this is at last the EV drivers should be paying for the upkeep of the roads. And that's one of the problems. Drivers are currently, fossil fuel drivers contribute something like 35 billion in terms of fuel duty and VAT per year. And that's not hypothecated. That goes into general taxation. And only 13 to 14% of the money they give out goes to the upkeep of the roads. Now, I must get it straight. I'm actually pro-EVs. It's great. I just don't like us being forced into driving EVs, and EVs need to stand on their own four tyres. They shouldn't be made to be believed they're viable by having a draconian ban in 2030 on diesel and petrol cars. That's the only way they're going to become viable. But in answer to your question, I'm pleased there is a tax going on it, even though it's not going to touch the size. I suspect a Nissan Leaf will pay about 20 quid a year, and a Tesla S will probably pay 100 quid a year, where still drivers are still going to be paying thousands in fuel duty.
It just feels like it's just getting too expensive, too extortionate to do anything in this country at the moment. I must get you on a last thing, another transport, energy, fuel issue. Sadiq Khan's ultra-low emission zones. Everyone hates them. What's happening with those?
Well, I'm in conflict with Sadiq Khan on this one, because a lot of our supporters actually, in their consultation agreement, the ultra-low emission zone, to expand to outside to Greater London, we got 5,000 or 6,000 actually took part, and they didn't like that, because I was just asking through a democratic process for our supporters to object to the expansion. I understand that, one day he's saying that polls are great and they're right if they agree with him. If they don't agree with him, then the polls are definitely worrying. And
Howard, I'm terribly sorry. I'm going to have to cut you off mid-flow, but I'm sure we will return to this another time. I have to go to the break. That, of course, was Howard Cox, fantastic campaigner and founder of Fair Fuel UK. You're watching Real Britain with me, Emily Carver. More after the break.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Stein Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Stein Show.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dubes & Co. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Dubes & Co.
Welcome back to Real Britain with me, Emily Carver, on your TV, radio and online. Now, coming up this hour, the Chancellor's autumn statement unveiled a raft of measures impacting those on universal credit and those due to receive a state pension. So I'm asking, does this budget favour those on welfare and pensions over the ordinary working man and woman? Is that fair to say? And has King Charles gone against his late mother's wishes and cancelled plans for Prince Edward to be the new Duke of Edinburgh? And what's happening with Prince Harry and Meghan's much-awaited Netflix series? They seem to have fallen out with the staff there as well. But first, it's your latest news headlines.
Good afternoon. It's 2 minutes past 3. I'm Ray Addison in the GB Newsroom. The UK is boosting its support for Ukraine, pledging a £50 million package of air defence aid. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak confirmed the move during an unannounced visit to Kyiv. He told President Volodymyr Zelensky the UK will continue to stand with the country as it fights to end Russia's barbarous war.
Homes, your hospitals, your power stations are being destroyed by the air. So to help you defend yourselves, we are today providing new air defence support, including 120 anti-aircraft guns, radar and anti-drone equipment. We're extending our training for the Ukrainian armed forces to include specialist expertise from UK medics and engineers. And we are stepping up our support to help you through the cold, hard winter ahead.
The chief executive of Rochdale Borough-wide Housing has been sacked after a 2-year-old boy died because of prolonged exposure to mould. An inquest heard how the parents of Awab Ishak had made numerous complaints to the council but were simply told to paint over it. The council issued a statement saying it was no longer tenable for Gareth Swarbrick to stay on. That's despite his earlier refusal to step down. The government has welcomed the decision but says the board still has questions to answer. FIFA's president has defended the decision to host the World Cup in Qatar and tried to show empathy during a news conference.
Today I feel gay. Today I feel disabled.
Gianni Infantino's comments follow heavy criticism of Doha's treatment of migrant workers and LGBTQ people. He says he's compassionate towards all groups. He also accused the West of hypocrisy, telling European nations they have a lot to answer for.
I'm European. Actually, I am European. Not just I feel European. I think for what we Europeans have been doing in the last 3,000 years around the world, we should be apologizing for the next 3,000 years before starting to give moral lessons.
Well, human rights campaigner Peter Tatchell told GB News the tournaments should never have been given to Qatar, and anyone connected with it risks damaging their reputation.
Well, I think it's really shameful that celebrities are allowing themselves to be bought by the Qatar billions in order to put a positive spin on what is a sexist, homophobic and racist dictatorship. I mean, how can David Beckham, Robbie Williams and all these other big stars who are performing in Qatar, how can they have a clean conscience when they know what this regime is doing to people? I think it's going to cause them huge, huge damage.
The United Nations is proposing the creation of a new fund to help developing countries cope with the cost of climate change. The money would be used to compensate 134 developing nations for the loss and damage experienced due to droughts, floods and wildfires. The text is yet to be approved by the COP27 summit in Egypt, which had to be extended after delegates failed to reach an agreement. The Foreign Secretary is warning that the threat from Iran's nuclear program is more advanced than ever before. Speaking at a security conference in Bahrain, James Cleverly stressed Britain's determination to stop the strict Islamic country from acquiring a nuclear weapon. He also criticised Iran's rulers for supplying Russia with drones, which have been used to launch attacks against civilians in Ukraine.
People demonstrate against decades of oppression. Iran's rulers are spreading bloodshed and destruction across the region and as far away as Kyiv. Britain is determined to work alongside our friends to counter the Iranian threat, interdict the smuggling of conventional arms, and prevent the regime from acquiring nuclear weapons capability.
Well, meanwhile, North Korea says it's accelerating the creation of nuclear weapons to counter threats from Washington. State media showed... That state media showing video of a new intercontinental ballistic missile being test-fired after the country's leader warned of a fiercer military response. Kim Jong-un was also seen in public with his daughter for the first time, raising speculation that she could be training for a leadership role. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's get back to Emily.
Welcome back to Real Britain with me, Emily Carver. Now, here's what's coming up on the show. In the very latest GB News People's Poll, we asked if you support the Chancellor's plan to make people on universal credit have a work coach to help them get back into employment. And over 50% of you have said yes. So, albeit if the autumn statement was good for people on benefits, we also asked that, then thousands of asylum seekers will be housed in rural areas in a bid to ensure fairness and spread the numbers out across the country. But how do the people living in these areas feel about having a migrant next door? And finally, King Charles has reportedly ripped up the Queen and Philip's plan for Edward to be Duke of Edinburgh in his attempts to slim down the monarchy. Is the king right to go against his late mother's wishes? That's what we're talking about for the next hour. I'd love to know your thoughts, so please do tweet me at GBNews, or you can email me on gbviews@gbnews.uk. You can watch us online too on YouTube, and don't forget Facebook. You'll find lots of brilliant content there on the GB News page. Right, as we were discussing earlier, the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has made an unannounced visit to Ukraine, during which he has met President Zelensky for the first time. He pledged the UK's continued support for the Ukrainian war effort. Here's what he said during a joint press conference with the Ukrainian President.
In years to come, we will tell our grandchildren of your story, how a proud and sovereign people stood up in the face of an appalling onslaught, how you fought, how you sacrificed, how you prevailed. As Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, I'm proud of how we stood with you from the very beginning. And I'm here today to say that the United Kingdom will continue to stand with you. We will stand with you until Ukraine has won the peace and security it needs and deserves.
Now, GB News political reporter Olivia Utley joins me in the studio now. So, what do we know about this surprise trip?
Well, the latest is that Rishi Sunak has promised a £50 million package of air defence help for Ukraine, along with helping training Ukrainian soldiers on the ground there. The purpose of the visit, obviously, was to show solidarity with Ukraine, and of course, Britain was lauded in the international community for being really the first and the strongest defender of Ukraine. Boris Johnson, of course, had that very good personal relationship with Ukraine, and once he left office, there was a bit of a worry that Britain wouldn't be able to keep up that role. But Rishi Sunak is there today making these promises. It'll be a good reassurance to Ben Wallace, who is critical to the government security inside Westminster. He's very, very popular, and Conservative members outside Westminster also think that he is integral to the government's success. So he'll be calmed and reassured by this proposal of a £50 million support package for Ukraine. Whether Rishi Sunak can keep promising these quite expensive packages without a backlash at home is going to be interesting to see, because he's walking a pretty thin tightrope here. Over the autumn statement, of course, both Rishi and Jeremy Hunt, his Chancellor, were talking about how squeezed middle-income Brits are, and the challenges that we face in the winter months ahead, and how they were going to, ordinary working Brits were going to have to face tax cuts, stealth tax cuts in particular. So whether he'll be able to square that stuff.
No cuts anymore, no cuts.
No cuts. Those days are gone. So whether he'll be able to square that with this, yes, we can offer £50 million package to Ukraine, will be quite interesting to see politically how it lands.
Yes, thank you very much. I do wonder whether seeing another £50 million is going to be music to many people's ears in this country. I think at least we need to know that other countries are also behind this effort as much as we are. We need to all be in it together, I think, on this one, if we're going to be forking out that much cash. Now, the Chancellor's autumn statement, back to that, unveiled a raft of measures impacting those on universal credit and those due to receive a state pension. The triple lock, ensuring pensions rise in line with inflation, is to be retained, as well as a 10.1% increase in universal credit payments to help struggling families with both the energy and cost of living crisis. However, sweeping tax rises across the board have left many asking whether the Chancellor has got the balance right. And in our very latest GB News People's Poll, on the poll. As Chancellor Mr Hunt announced, the more than 600,000 people on universal credit will have to meet with a work coach to help them get back to work. We asked people if they supported this plan. 57% of you said yes. And in the same poll, we asked, who do you blame for the current economic mess in the UK? 21% said Liz Truss, while an equal proportion blamed Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And the threshold at which people pay the highest rate of tax, 45p in the pound, has been reduced from £150,000 to nearly £125,000. 50% of people polled support the measure. That's half of you support that measure, or half of those polled at least. And finally, when asked which of the following would be best to manage the British economy in the years ahead, 42% said they don't know. However, a Keir Starmer Labour government was ahead of Rishi Sunak's administration. So, joining me now is Matthew Stadlin, a political commentator here in the studio, and Joe Ventry, digital campaign manager at the Taxpayers Alliance. Now, Joe, it doesn't look like the Taxpayers Alliance have done a good job in terms of getting those taxes down. It seems the only way is up.
It does, Emily. It's a very unfortunate time. You know, I think this statement that we've seen has absolutely clobbered working taxpayers, while, of course, pensioners and people with benefits have had the kitchen sink thrown at them with, 10% rises coming to universal credit payments and pensions in line with inflation. But, I think this is really, we want to protect people who are vulnerable. Of course we do. But this really is writing a massive check for working taxpayers who, of course, are seeing no relief for themselves at the moment.
Matthew, now the pensions triple lock, whenever I even suggest that perhaps there could be a bit more means testing, because of course there are pensioners who are wealthy and there are pensioners who very much are at the other end of the scale and are living in poverty, essentially. When I mentioned that perhaps there could be a bit of means testing, I get lots of abuse. A lot of people disagree fundamentally. They say we paid into the system all our lives. We should be able to have our pensions risen with inflation. What do you think?
Well, first of all, it's important that everyone understands what the triple lock is. I don't think we all do understand. It's the higher of wages, 2.5%, or inflation that pensions have to go up by. It was paused briefly by Therese Coffey when she was in charge of work and pensions, but it's now returned to being enshrined. I actually agree with you. I think that the wealthiest pensioners, it should be means tested. If, and this is an important if the bureaucracy doesn't mean that actually it ends up being terribly expensive. But we have to remember, when you think of pensioners, we think of people who, such as this person on your screen at the moment, who might be really incredibly vulnerable. People are going to be freezing this winter if their benefits do not rise in line with inflation. So I think it's absolutely right that Jeremy Hunt has done what he's done. It's very interesting because someone like me, who I would describe myself as on the moderate left, I actually think this budget has been a fairly decent budget. Yes, it's the Tories who helped, not entirely, but helped get us into this mess with the disastrous regime of Liz Truss, which only lasted a month or so. But nonetheless, I think they have done something to try and get us out of the mess in an equitable way, because they are making the highest earners pay more. And as I say, benefits will rise with inflation, and the triple lock is protected. So even though I'm someone who backs Keir Starmer's Labour Party and would like to see Labour win the next election, I don't think the Tories have done themselves that much harm.
That's quite interesting, because it does show, what you've just said does show that there really isn't much difference between the Labour Party and the Conservative Party at this point.
Economically,
which is very interesting, because I think, and it goes to that question in the People's poll that asked who do you think would be better for the economy right now, and people don't know. They don't know the difference between the two parties at the moment. But I hate the intergenerational sort of warfare that we see in the media, and we see some young commentators getting very angry, don't we, Joe, about the fact that the triple lock has been kept and so on and so forth. And I think there is often a misrepresentation, as Matthew alluded to, of pensioners as all living in £1 million houses and so on and so forth. How does one avoid falling into that trap of being accused of, bashing older people, which is certainly not what I would wish to do, but also realising that working people are being clobbered?
Well, of course, we do need to talk in terms of moderation here, like you said. But I think one of the things we really need to consider here is coming up with positive solutions, I suppose. And I think what we need to remember is that if we're to have any hope of protecting vulnerable people sustainably, what we need is a strong economy that can afford good public services. And, I think we need to start thinking how we're going to get back to being that strong economy again. And what we really need fundamentally is growth. And I think in a lot of ways, this was an anti-growth statement. It's putting the productive part of the economy into a stranglehold in order to batten down the hatches in the short term. And I think we're all going to be paying the price for that in the years to come.
Yeah, Matthew, on the benefits question, quite a lot of people who work every day are frustrated, perhaps, with the number of people who are on out-of-work benefits. Now, some of those people will be sick or disabled or have caring responsibilities, but there are a lot of people who are out of work for no good reason, really. What do we do about that? Because I think for an economy to function, people need to feel like everyone is contributing.
So you asked me the question, Emily. I think that's a myth. I don't think that's borne out by facts. I think the vast majority of people in this country do the right thing. Don't forget what GBNews stands for. It's basically about Britain being a great country. We are a great country, and by and large, we do the right thing. That's one of the things that make us the country we are. So I think that's a myth. It's the sort of thing that elements of the right-wing media like to spout in order to whip us up against each other, to find scapegoats.
No, can I just... I don't wish to generalise, but there are statistics from some towns and cities in this country where you have a quarter of people of working age on out-of-work benefits. That is a problem, and something that you could argue the Conservative Party has neglected. Instead we've had low-skilled labour from abroad to plug gaps in the labour market rather than, investing in the people we have here already. It's not a negative thing.
We absolutely should invest wherever we can. We have to invest in people. We have to invest in skills. In the short term, we've got chronic shortages of manpower and womanpower. So we do need people coming to this country. Some of the people who've been scapegoated recently, the Albanians I'm thinking of in particular, if we put those people to work, our economy would be stronger. I've just done some work to the front of my house, and my friend, an Albanian builder, Kajesi, has done it. He's done it very well. He's become a good friend. I've just helped his daughter, actually, with her statement, and she's about to be interviewed for Cambridge. People want to come here and make good lives for themselves. But back to the point, I work hard, you work hard, we all work hard. None of us wants to pay egregious amounts of tax, but I would prefer to pay a decent amount of tax myself in order to live in a society where this winter, when it gets colder, people such as the lady you saw on the screen are not going to be choosing between heating, keeping themselves warm and eating. That working families, or even families who can't work for whatever reason, are not going to be choosing between heating and keeping their children warm or eating and feeding them nutritiously. We want to live in a society that cares for each other. Of course, work should pay. Of course, we want people to work. But my firm belief is, and I do believe the statistics back this up, that the majority of Britons do want to do the right thing. They don't want to stick around on the sofa all day. They want to go out, do a hard day's work, and then pay taxes so that we can live in a society where we all rub along well together.
Yeah, Joe, just to finish, I'll give you the last word. Now, it's not very trendy, fashionable to defend the rich in this day and age, but do you think it acts as a bad incentive to essentially have now that 45p rate come down in terms of the threshold? It won't impact that many of us, won't impact that much of the public, but does it kind of prevent people in some way from aspiring for more?
Well, you're right in a way, Emily, that it doesn't impact us all directly, but my concern actually is that it will impact us all indirectly. I mean, of course, these are people who very high incomes who invest in our economy, who spend a lot on our shops and our services. And of course, when you take that money away from them in terms of taxes, that's money that could otherwise be going back into the economy. But, I think broadly, I'm more concerned about the fiscal drag that we're all going to be feeling, about how much more tax we're all going to be paying as working taxpayers. And I think it's incredibly worrying, especially for those people on low incomes.
Yes, I think it's a big disincentive when you see your income tax rate go up and more of your money taken away by the state. Thank you very much for both of you for joining me. That's Matthew Stadlen, political commentator in the studio, and Joe Ventry, digital campaign manager at the Taxpayers Alliance. Now, plenty more to come this afternoon on Real Britain. After the break, thousands of asylum seekers will be housed in rural areas in bid to ensure fairness and spread the numbers out across the country. But how do people living in these rural areas feel about it? But first, let's have a look at the weather.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK will be mostly dry, but heavy rain will push in from the west. Here are the details. Let's start off in the southwest of England, and it will be a cloudy end to the day with some rain starting to reach western parts of Cornwall, spreading to all later. Over in the southeast, it'll be cloudy for some, with outbreaks of rain, especially in London. Other areas, though, will have a clear evening. Turning cloudier across Wales this evening, so whilst eastern parts may have some clear spells, the cloud will thicken ahead of rain arriving later. Cloud and a few spots of rain are likely for the East Midlands. Meanwhile, the West Midlands should end the day on a dry and clear note before things turn wet overnight. A cloudy picture this evening for northeast England. The odd spot of rain is possible, but for many it'll be dry. Some low cloud may bring hill fog to any higher routes. Often cloudy for much of Scotland this evening, with some rain likely. Heavy rain then arriving from the west overnight, spreading to all parts and becoming impactful in the east. A very wet and windy evening for Northern Ireland. Here the rain should clear during the first part of the night, so it will be drier and clearer to start Sunday. The band of heavy rain will continue to sweep eastwards to all parts overnight, with clearer but showery weather following. That's how the weather is shaping up overnight into tomorrow morning.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join me, Arlene Foster, for the briefing on GB News. Every Friday at 3 p.m, I'll give you all the latest political news and analysis, and we'll have robust live debate. To make sure that you're caught up on all of the biggest issues of the day, we'll bring on experts in their field. I'll ask the questions that you'd like to ask. We're not afraid to tackle discussions from all perspectives, including yours. Don't forget, the briefing with me, Arlene Foster, every Friday at 3 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Alastair Stewart, and I'd invite you to join me at noon on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. And now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me, noon on Saturdays and Sundays.
Welcome back to Real Britain with me, Emily Carver, on GB News, on TV, online and on your digital radio. Now, rural councils have been informed that they will be forced to accept groups of migrants to house in order to ensure fairness across the country amid the ongoing crisis. Immigration Minister Robert Jenrick stated that migrants who arrived on small boats would now also be housed in towns and rural areas across the country to ensure the burden does not fall on a few large cities. The move, however, has been met with backlash from many MPs and councils who have accused the government of using their local areas as, in quotes, dumping grounds. With me now is Claire Pearsall, a Conservative councillor. Claire, now I've spoken to a few of my local councillors about this and they're finding it extremely difficult, firstly to accommodate asylum seekers and then to pay for the extra infrastructure costs, be it extra GP appointment, extra school places, extra bus routes, etc., etc. It's very difficult for local councils, isn't it?
It certainly is, and it does make you wonder whether Home Office officials have ever set foot in a rural area before so that they understand what they're actually proposing. I live in quite a small village in a rural location, and there isn't the housing stock. So just on the beginning of this, where would you put people? If you manage to find housing, it's going to be probably private landlords. There isn't much council housing, particularly where I live. And also, what would you then do with getting them the assistance that they need? They will need to go and speak to Home Office officials. There is no bus route at the moment. It has just been cancelled by the county, so we have a real problem with that. So if you don't drive, to get into the nearest town is 10 miles away. It's very, very difficult. So I don't think that the Home Office have actually thought this through. It sounded a very nice headline from the Immigration Minister that everybody must play their part. But realistically, it just doesn't work. And I don't understand why they keep pushing this rhetoric through that everybody has to take their fair share when my county of Kent already does more than enough and more than a lot of other boroughs.
It seems to me that it is utterly undemocratic, and a lot of people in this country, Conservative voters included, are just totally fed up because they have no say in this at all, and the government has failed time and time again to get the crossings under control, and then they expect, with absolutely no vote or any say-so, for councils to pick up the pieces.
And also, with the budget that's just happened, we are looking at an increase in council tax, which is already going to put pressure on those families who are finding the cost of living crisis increasingly difficult. And if they are looking at these tax increases, not going on the services that they need to get on with their lives, but now actually being diverted to go and help people that perhaps shouldn't be in this country, you can see why there is going to be such a lot of anger. It isn't really thought about. I'm not sure that local councils are going to get any kind of say on this. And they're the ones who are going to have to pick up the pieces. Now, my community is incredibly welcoming. We've welcomed people from Ukraine. We've welcomed people from Syria. But those were through very precise schemes, and all of the help is put in place. You can't just expect a village of 6,000 people to suddenly take on another couple of thousand without the forethought of what you're going to actually do with these people. And the real fact is that they are more likely to abscond. They are more likely to fall into crime gangs, the county lines gangs that work up and down the southeast of England, and you will lose people that way. So it doesn't help anybody. It doesn't help the migrants. It doesn't give them a sense of where they belong or where they could belong, and the local communities are just going to be disrupted.
Yeah, I mean, it does just seem absurd when you read this. Also, as you mentioned there, as you alluded to, we can't be sure that these people will stay where they're put. Why would a young man that's come across the channel essentially to make a better life for himself stay in a sleepy village in Dorset? He's not going to. And from what I've seen in my local council, in the hotel that has migrants in my area, there's no security at all. It's very, very easy for anyone who's there just to go on the run and, travel around the country wherever they'd like to be.
Well, that's the point. And then there seems to be no accountability. We're unsure as to who would be the lead authority on this. Is it the police? Is it the Home Office? Is it the local council? Is it the county council, for example? There are so many questions that are unanswered. What happens if there is a problem? would we contact the police? In a rural area, to try and get the police to attend quickly is very, very difficult given the nature and the geography of the areas involved. Rural areas are often the ones that are left behind on policing matters. I see it here all the time, and my local residents do complain that we need a more active police force, but they are very, very stretched and they will go to the towns where they are busiest. So I can't see who is the most accountable person here. Do we phone up Robert Jenrick? That would be an answer, wouldn't it?
That would be an answer. I think a lot of Conservative councillors will be trying to do that, I'm sure. Thank you very much, Claire, Conservative councillor. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. Now, you're with GB News on TV and DAB radio. After the break, King Charles has reportedly ripped up the Queen and Philip's plans for Edward to be Duke of Edinburgh in his attempts to slim down the monarchy. Is the King right to go against his late mother's wishes? Now, it's time for a check on the news headlines.
Good afternoon, I'm Ray Addison in the GB Newsroom. The UK is boosting its support for Ukraine, pledging a £50 million package of air defence aid. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak confirmed the move during an unannounced visit to Kyiv. He told President Volodymyr Zelensky the UK will continue to stand with the country as it fights to end the barbarous war.
Homes, your hospitals, your power stations are being destroyed by the air. So to help you defend yourselves, we are today providing new air defence support, including 120 anti-aircraft guns, radar and anti-drone equipment. We're extending our training for the Ukrainian armed forces to include specialist expertise from UK medics and engineers. And we are stepping up our support to help you through the cold, hard winter ahead.
Well, back here, the chief executive of Rochdale Borough-wide Housing has been sacked after a 2-year-old boy died following prolonged exposure to mould. An inquest heard how the parents of Awab Ishak had made numerous complaints to the council but were simply told to paint over it. The council issued a statement saying it was no longer tenable for Gareth Swarbrick to stay on. The government has welcomed the decision but says the board still has questions to answer. FIFA's president has defended the decision to host the World Cup in Qatar and tried to show empathy during a news conference.
Today I feel gay. Today I feel disabled.
Gianni Infantino's comments follow heavy criticism of Doha's treatment of migrant workers and LGBTQ people. He says he's compassionate towards all groups. He also accused the West of hypocrisy, telling European nations they have a lot to answer for. We're on TV, online and on DAB+ radio. You're watching the People's Channel, GB News. Don't go anywhere. Emily will be back in just a moment.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Friday and Sunday night from 9, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
We're on the same page again. There's something good happening.
Let Ian finish. Don't be such a cranky.
That mini budget was the tip of the iceberg.
And on Saturday, my show just got bigger. From 8, it's Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In.
You can't govern a country if you can't speak. Stop talking.
My God, we reached the end. I've never been early in my life. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. There's never been a more interesting but also critical time in British politics, and I can't wait to bring you the biggest stories of the day with the best factual accuracy and also a few of my own opinions thrown in. We'll engage in passionate but always polite debate with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Monday to Thursday, 10 till 12 on TV, on radio and online.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Welcome back to Real Britain with me, Emily Carver, on GB News. We're on your TV, online and on your digital radio now. We spoke about Sunak's ambitions to make the streets safer for women earlier in the show. This week, police forces around the UK have been carrying out Operation Sceptre, a targeted national initiative to reduce knife crime, which affects mostly young men. By both engaging with their local communities as well as cracking down on criminals who carry knives, the police are aiming to make the UK a safer place to live. Our North West of England reporter, Sophie Reaper, has this report.
A national crisis. In the last decade, knife crime in England and Wales has increased by 48%. And as the number of knives continues to increase, education is more important than ever.
Carrying a knife is one thing, but associating with it can now get you in serious trouble.
In 2014, Byron Heighton's brother, John Joe, was murdered in Preston. Since then, he began the JJ Effect, an organisation dedicated to educating people about the weapon used to kill his brother.
We now have kids as young as sometimes 13, 14, if not younger, admitting suicide, handing knives in, just because the schools trust me to give them what might be a crazy presentation never seen before, but the results also marry up to that. We're travelling up and down the country. We've taken nearly 600 knives off kids from as young as 6, all the way up to grown men and adults and women. You name it, we do it, and all that in the memory of my brother.
Up and down the UK, families like Byron's have been torn apart by knife crime. This week, police forces around the country have carried out Operation Sceptre, an initiative focused on tackling this issue.
In Lancashire, we make a really big effort for this week. We put a lot of resources into it to try and help the public and make sure that the communities are as safe as they can possibly be regarding this knife crime issue.
Operation Sceptre takes knives off the streets, but it's also about changing people's perceptions. As part of that, Chief Inspector Oldfield has a message for anyone who feels they have the right to carry a knife.
I would ask them, first of all, don't take the knife with them. You must dispose of the knife, and you must speak to somebody about the issues around why you're actually carrying the knife. You may believe you need to carry that knife for protection, but that is not the case. What we want you to do is put that knife down and speak to somebody to get support.
Because ultimately, knives don't kill, people do. Sophie Reaper, GB News.
Thank you very much for that, Sophie. That's Sophie Reaper in the Northwest, I believe. Now, in royal news this week, the King announced a big shake-up to the royal family by amending his approved councillors of state to ensure Prince Andrew and Harry never deputise for him. There is also an alleged row over whether or not the King will allow his brother, Prince Edward, to inherit the title of Duke of Edinburgh, which the late Queen had promised him. All this follows the leak that Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's bombshell Netflix documentary could be released within weeks, despite their best efforts to delay it. The series is widely expected to be a tell-all on the Sussex story ahead of the Duke's book release early next year. With me now is Caroline Aston, royal commentator. Caroline, please tell us more about what's going on with King Charles and his decisions for how the family is going to look going forward. Is this a snub to his brother?
I don't think it's a snub. This idea of Prince Edward ultimately becoming Duke of Edinburgh first came up in the late 1990s. But of course, the royal family over the years since then have had very regular meetings to discuss the way ahead, the way the royal family should develop and grow. And Prince Philip was very much part of those meetings. So I would think this is very much in line with King Charles's idea to slim down the royal family, to make it light on its feet. And I very much doubt whether Prince Edward would see this as a direct snub. After all, I think both he and his wife, Sophie, have given great support in these last few months and in the sad days after the Queen's death. But the rest of the things, the Councillors of State issue is very interesting because, of course, in showbiz terms, the Councillors of State are the understudies to the top job. If the King is unable to function due to illness or being out of the country, as things originally stood, the Councillors of State were the Queen Consort, the Prince of Wales, Andrew and Harry, Prince Andrew and Prince Harry. Now, of course, Prince Andrew is not a working royal, and I'm sure if he was to take over his brother's role as a stand-in, there would be a furious backlash from the British public, or at least that seems to be the temperature of public opinion. Whereas, of course, Prince Harry no longer even lives in this country. So you have a loose thread in the tapestry of royal life, which obviously the King has decided to clarify by appointing Princess Anne, his sister, the Princess Royal, very hard-working, very much respected, and yes, Prince Edward, the Earl of Wessex and Forfar. Don't forget, those two have already fulfilled this function up until 2003, when Prince William came of age, aged 18, and of course, when Prince Harry came of age in 2005. So this is a clarification, as you so rightly say, means that neither Prince Andrew nor Prince Harry will carry out this function. So I think that draws a line under that one.
That does sound like it draws a line under that one. May I just clarify, you said that this is not a snub, this decision regarding Prince Edward and not being the Duke of Edinburgh, not inheriting that title. Now, the media, some of the papers, have presented this as against the Queen, Her Majesty the Queen, the late Queen, her wishes. Do you think that's an exaggeration?
I think it is an exaggeration. It's a very good story, doesn't it? And leads the door open to lots of fabulous headlines. We all love a right royal row, and there's one a-brewing, it would appear. But I make my point again, that view that should be a future title, Prince Edward, was made back in the 1990s, and I'm convinced that this is part of the evolution towards a slimmed-down royal family, very much in line with what King Charles has always said he wanted when he eventually did get the top job he's done a 70-year apprenticeship for.
Now, I must ask you about Prince Harry and Meghan. I'm very sad and I seem to follow their every single move. I've even listened to Meghan Markle's podcasts for research purposes, of course. This week it was Jamila Jamil, who is a very vocal, woke campaigner. I personally find her god-awful, but Meghan clearly found her terribly, terribly fascinating. Another way to draw attention to herself, no doubt. But there is also this Netflix series that is upcoming. What's going on there? We haven't really known when it's actually coming out.
Well, there's still debate about this. On the one hand, it was rumoured that the Sussexes wanted to delay it. They'd got, if not totally cold feet, maybe their toes were a bit icy about the water they were about to dip them into. But going on from that, it was rumoured January maybe that this would drop, because of course then it would have tied in beautifully with the nuclear bombshell called Spare, that is the memoir of Harry that's going to come out. Difficult to know quite what's going on, although apparently there has been controversy about directing this docu-series. There have been changes of people. And I think Meghan has said that this is seen through someone else's lens and may not be quite the way they would have told the story themselves if they'd had full editorial control and direction rights over the series. This is Netflix's choice of director. So maybe there's a little cop-out clause there. If it all goes a bit pear-shaped, maybe it won't be able to be laid at the already troubled door of the Sussexes in sunny Montecito.
A lovely picture you paint there. Just lastly, it does seem like they've been extraordinarily busy. I mean, I'm not sure how hard the work is, but in terms of publicising themselves, That Spotify series of podcasts by Meghan, which had a little cameo of Harry in the first one. I think he spoke about 2 words. We have this Netflix docu-series. We have this memoir called Spare coming out very soon too. What's next, do you think? Could it be politics?
Well, could be. After all, they have been, I think, named as getting a humanitarian award amid a great constellation of really big names. And there's controversy about that. Many people are saying, well, what exactly have they done in humanitarian terms? What has Archwell, their foundation, actually done in the couple of years or so that it's been in existence? I listen to them in a quite fascinated way, but sometimes I almost feel as though I need a translator to tell me exactly what they're saying. I'll keep on concentrating, keep on watching, and keep on waiting for that beep through the royal keyhole in downtown Montecito.
I'm sure Meghan will teach you through her podcast how to be a better person for the benefit of all people out there in the world. That seems to be what she's trying to share with us. Thank you very much, Caroline.
I'm trying to learn. I am trying to learn, Emily. I really am. I'm listening hard. So far, it's not had too much effect.
It's a re-education, I think. Thank you very much for joining us. Caroline Aston, royal commentator there, bringing us up to date on all the shenanigans, in particular, Harry and Meghan there to finish with. Now, lots of you have been getting in touch today about today's topics. Greg, on the autumn statement, had to say, although those on pensions and benefits are getting a 10.1% increase, let's remember that the minimum hourly rate has also been increased. I think he's referring to the minimum wage rise there, which is also getting a bit of a boost. I think someone DM'd me just now, reminding me of the fact that many people who are on universal credit are still working, and that, of course, people who are single parents, have caring responsibilities and so on and so forth, do need benefits essentially just to be able to make ends meet. So I don't wish to be non-empathetic to those people, but I do like to make the point that we do have more people out of work at the moment than we did before the pandemic, and something does need to be done about that. Now, Brian on Ukraine says, I'm sick and tired of hearing about the UK Prime Minister trotting off to Ukraine and spending our taxes dragging out this war. It's just another photo opportunity. Get back to the UK and sort this mess you Tories have made this past 12 years. Yes, I think some people do think that, you know, if everything was going swimmingly domestically, fine, go off onto the international stage, make your grand gestures with taxpayers' money, but perhaps at the moment it's a bit tricky to see this in a positive light. Anyway, Yvonne on pensions and benefits says, yes, get people off benefits and back to work. Makes me so angry to see people live on the cheap. A lot of people work the minimum amount of hours they need to stay on benefits. Leave the pensioners alone. They have worked all their lives, unlike the youngsters of today. So the pensions are rubbish anyway compared to universal credit. I imagine Yvonne is a pensioner herself. I think it's true, but we need to do something about making work pay. You know, if it's actually more beneficial to have half your money coming from benefits than it is to work that time in hours of work, then, you know, we've got a problem. We need higher paid wages in this country. Anyway, Nigel has an opposite view. He says, people seem to be getting upset over the 10% benefits increase. Unfortunately, there are disabled people who are physically unable to work and have no choice but to rely on benefits. These benefits are well below the minimum wage, but the disabled still have to pay ever-increasing prices. The possible 23% increase in fuel is also going to be a problem for people in this situation. It's a tax on disability. I think that's very true. I think one of the conclusions of this budget, and from the commentary that's come after it, is that no one is happy and no one feels like they're well off at the moment, apart from perhaps, you know, the top 1% who'll be fine whatever happens. It does feel like the majority of the country feels completely squeezed, those on benefits and those in work alike. Now, former Prime Minister Boris Johnson, we're moving on, has reportedly earned £276,000 for a speech given to American insurers and brokers in a recent trip. The revelation has sparked further debate on what politicians should be allowed to earn whilst holding public office a discussion that was kick-started after the recent controversy of former Health Secretary Matt Hancock's decision to appear on I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, while still being a sitting Member of Parliament. With me now is Rakib Ehsan, a social policy analyst and a friend of mine. Rakib, thank you very much for joining us. Do you think most people seeing Boris Johnson swanning off to the US for £276,000 for a couple of hours of his time, how do you think people feel about this?
I'm not entirely sure, to be honest, Emily, but one thing I will say is that it's not especially rare. Previous prime ministers have been paid very lavishly to give these kind of speeches. In this particular instance, former Prime Minister Boris Johnson was paid £276,130 plus expenses. During that talk, he covered Brexit and the war in Ukraine. The reality of the matter is he is a leading figure when it came to the UK's withdrawal from the European Union. And Britain is Ukraine's number one ally when it comes to its conflict with Russia. So, of course, many people look at that, especially in the middle of a cost of living crisis. They may well think that, well, Boris Johnson should ultimately be concentrating on his parliamentary duties. But a speech of this nature with the topics which were covered, others may well argue that he was very well positioned to discuss those kind of matters.
Yes, I think most people accept that prime ministers will go on to earn quite a bit of money off the back of, well, essentially serving the country, you might say, if you were generous, or, you know, having the position of power that they have had. They're interesting to businesses and people with a lot of money. However, he is still a serving Member of Parliament, and I don't think his constituents would be too pleased with the fact that he's swanning off during parliamentary time. That, for me, is the issue, and it's the same issue with Matt Hancock, again, during parliamentary time.
Absolutely, Emily. I think Matt Hancock's appearance in I'm a Celebrity, unsurprisingly, many of his constituents weren't particularly pleased about that. And there'll also be constituents in Boris Johnson's seat who may well feel that he really should be concentrating on his parliamentary duties, representing local bread and butter concerns, as opposed to going across the pond and being paid so lavishly to give such speeches to US insurance agents.
I mean, it is mad. I can't imagine earning £276,000 for delivering a speech. Nice work if you can get it. But just very lastly, this is the same issue that we've had come up time and time again. You have a number of Labour politicians, for example, who host radio shows. You have Conservative MPs who also host TV shows, a couple on this channel as well, actually, thankfully. I do wonder, is being an MP a job? Is it a job or is it a position that you can hold whilst doing other things?
I think people have different views on how MPs should behave and what kind of work-related engagements they should take on. I do think that there are discussions about how that role of being a parliamentarian is evolving. And I do think that MPs being involved in the media, hosting their own radio shows, their own shows on channels such as GBNews, at least what they'll be doing through their role is bringing issues to the table that many British voters may well care about, and they'll also they're adding a layer of scrutiny to their own political views by putting themselves out there in the public, especially in media broadcasting, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, Emily.
No, I think that's probably fair, although I do still find it rather annoying. Anyway, thank you very much, Rakib Ehsan. Rakib is a social policy analyst and a friend of the show. So, time's up. You've been watching Real Britain with me, Emily Carver. Thank you very much for tuning in this afternoon. We've got Nana up next, but for now, I'll leave you with the weather.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK will be mostly dry, but heavy rain will push in from the west. Here are the details. Let's start off in the southwest of England, and it will be a cloudy end to the day with some rain starting to reach western parts of Cornwall, spreading to all later. Over in the southeast, it'll be cloudy for some, with outbreaks of rain, especially in London. Other areas, though, will have a clear evening. Turning cloudier across Wales this evening, so whilst eastern parts may have some clear spells, spells, the cloud will thicken ahead of rain arriving later. Cloud and a few spots of rain are likely for the East Midlands. Meanwhile, the West Midlands should end the day on a dry and clear note before things turn wet overnight. A cloudy picture this evening for northeast England. The odd spot of rain is possible, but for many it'll be dry. Some low cloud may bring hill fog to any higher routes. Often cloudy for much of Scotland this evening, with some rain likely. Heavy rain then arriving from the west overnight, spreading to all parts and becoming impactful in the east. A very wet and windy evening for Northern Ireland. Here the rain should clear during the first part of the night, so it will be drier and clearer to start Sunday. The band of heavy rain will continue to sweep eastwards to all parts overnight, with clearer but showery weather following. That's how the weather is shaping up overnight into tomorrow morning.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland, Wales
and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio
and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Stein Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters.